My brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Tonight I want to take you to a moment in history so profound, so overwhelming in its emotional weight, that even after 14 centuries, it still brings tears to the eyes of anyone who truly reflects on it. I want you to close your eyes for a second. Not really, keep them open so you can still see me, but I want you to picture it in your mind. 10,000 men marching toward a city, not a small city, not an insignificant city. Makkah, the city that had exiled its own son. The city that had boycotted his family until children were eating leaves off trees out of hunger. The city that had tortured his companions in the blazing sun of the desert, that had placed a bounty on his head, that had plotted, planned and pursued his death for over a decade. And now, 13 years after being forced to flee that very city in the darkness of night, he is returning to it. Not as a refugee, not as a fugitive, but at the head of an army so large, so overwhelming, that the city itself trembled at the sight of the dust cloud rising on the horizon. Now here is the question I want us to sit with tonight, because it is the question that defines everything that follows. What happens when the very people who hurt you the most are finally, completely, entirely in your hands? What happens when you finally have the power to do to them exactly what they did to you? And worse, and no one on earth could blame you for it. This, my brothers and sisters, is where true character is revealed. Not in how we behave when we are weak and powerless. Anyone can be patient when they have no other choice. Not in how we behave when things are going our way. Anyone can be pleasant when life is kind to them. True character, the character that Allah is truly testing us on, is revealed in that singular moment when we finally hold the power to hurt those who hurt us, and we choose instead restraint. Let's go back further, so we can properly feel the weight of what I'm describing. Think about Bilal, radiallahu anhu, dragged across the burning sands of Makkah with a boulder on his chest, told he would die there unless he renounced his faith, and through cracked lips, all he could say was, Ahad, Ahad, one. Think about Sumayya, radiallahu anha, the first martyr of this ummah, killed for the crime of believing in one God. Think about the years of the boycott when the Prophet ﷺ and his family and his followers were sealed off in a valley, cut off from trade, from food, from basic mercy simply because of their faith. Think about the day in Taif when he ﷺ was rejected, mocked and had children set upon him to throw stones until his blessed feet bled into his sandals. Think about the loss of his beloved wife Khadija radiallahu anha and his uncle Abu Talib, both within the same year, a year so heavy it is remembered in our history as the year of sorrow. Think about the assassination attempt on the very night of the Hijrah, when the leaders of Quraysh gathered from every tribe, each one assigned to strike a single blow, so that the blood of the Prophet ﷺ would be spread across all of them, and no single family could be held responsible. I am reminding you of all of this in detail, not to stir up anger in your heart, but so that you truly understand what I am about to tell you next. Because if you don't feel the depth of the wound, you cannot possibly appreciate the height of the mercy that followed it. 13 years. 13 years of exile, of war, of loss, of grief, of betrayal, of assassination attempts, of siege, of hunger, of humiliation. And now in the 8th year after the Hijrah, the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, a treaty the Muslims had accepted even though its terms seemed on the surface deeply unfavorable to them, is broken by the Quraysh and their allies. The Banu Bakr allied with Quraysh attack the Banu Khuza'a allied with the Muslims, and Quraysh even assist them with weapons. This is the final straw. The treaty is void and the Prophet ﷺ prepares to march on Makkah. Now watch what happens next, because this is where the entire lesson of tonight begins to unfold. As the Muslim army approaches, panic spreads through Makkah like wildfire. Abu Sufyan, the very man who had led armies against the Muslims at Uhud, the very man whose wife Hind had chewed on the liver of Hamza, radiallahu anhu, in a display of savage vengeance after that battle, this same Abu Sufyan comes out, terrified, uncertain of his fate, to seek some kind of understanding with the approaching army. And what does he encounter? He encounters Al-Abbas, the uncle of the Prophet ﷺ, who brings him under cover of night to meet the very man he had spent years trying to destroy. Picture this meeting. Picture the tension in that tent, in that moment, in the darkness of that night before the conquest. Abu Sufyan, a man who had every reason to expect death, standing before the Prophet ﷺ. And what does the Prophet ﷺ ask him? Not for revenge, not for a confession under duress. He asks him gently to bear witness that there is no God but Allah and that he is his messenger. And when Abu Sufyan hesitates, even in that moment, even facing the man whose army was about to enter his city, he hesitates on the Shahada while readily accepting the first part about Allah. The Prophet ﷺ does not force him, does not threaten him, does not raise his voice. Al-Abbas, sensing the danger Abu Sufyan is still in, gently pushes him to say the words, and eventually he does. And then, and I want you to really absorb what happens next, the Prophet ﷺ announces that whoever enters the house of Abu Sufyan will be safe. The very man who led the disbelieving armies at Uhud, the very man who spent years of his life and wealth fighting against Islam, is given not just his life but honor, and his home is made a sanctuary. Brothers and sisters, think about what this tells us about the heart of the man being described. He had the power in that tent, in that darkness, to end the life of a man who had caused him and his companions immeasurable suffering. No one on earth would have questioned it. This was, by every standard of the time, by every standard of any era, completely within the norms of warfare and justice. And yet what we see is not the exercise of that power, but the deliberate, conscious choice to set it aside. This is what I mean, my brothers and sisters, when I say that victory achieved through restraint is a different kind of victory altogether. Any army, any conqueror, any powerful nation throughout history can win a war and then punish the defeated. That requires no special character. That is simply the default setting of human nature when unchecked. When we are hurt, we want the ones who hurt us to hurt back. This is not unique to any era or any people. It is woven into the base instinct of a wounded creature. What requires extraordinary character, what requires a heart shaped by something far greater than ordinary human instinct, is standing at the height of your power, staring directly at the people who caused you the deepest pain of your life, and choosing something other than retaliation. Let's continue the story, because it only gets more remarkable. As the army approaches the outskirts of Makkah, the Prophet ﷺ divides his forces into several columns, entering the city from different directions. And here is something worth pausing on. He gives clear, explicit instructions that there should be no fighting unless they are fought. This is not the language of a man seeking conquest for its own sake, seeking blood for the sake of blood. This is the language of a man whose primary objective, even at the head of 10,000 soldiers, remains the preservation of life wherever possible. In one column under Khalid ibn al-Walid radiallahu anhu, some resistance is encountered from a small group of Quraysh fighters, and a brief skirmish occurs, resulting in a small number of casualties on both sides. But this was resistance met with defense, not a campaign of aggression sought out and pursued. Everywhere else, the entry into Makkah happens almost without incident. 10,000 men enter one of the most significant cities in Arabia, a city whose leadership had tortured and exiled them, and it happens with barely a drop of blood spilled. Sit with that for a moment. 10,000 men entering the city of their former persecutors, and the overwhelming reality on the ground is calm, is order, is restraint. Now we come to the moment that I believe defines this entire chapter of history more than any other single moment. The standing of the Prophet ﷺ at the door of the Kaaba, addressing the very people of Makkah who had done everything in their power to destroy him and his message. Picture the scene. The people of Quraysh gathered uncertain, terrified, expecting the worst. They know their history. They know what they did. They remember the boycotts, the torture, the wars, the assassination attempts. If the roles were reversed, and every single person standing there knew this, because it was simply how the world worked in that era. And honestly, if we're being honest with ourselves, how much of the world still works today? If the roles were reversed, there would be no mercy shown. There would be executions. There would be enslavement. There would be the complete and total subjugation of the defeated party, because that is what victors did to those who had wronged them for over a decade. And into this atmosphere of dread, the Prophet ﷺ asks them a single question. What do you think I am about to do to you? And they respond, perhaps hoping against hope, perhaps simply trying to appeal to whatever mercy might exist. You are a noble brother, son of a noble brother. And then comes the sentence that I believe should be engraved into the heart of every single person who has ever been wronged, every single person who has ever had the opportunity for revenge and had to decide what to do with it. Go, for you are free. 4 words that undid 13 years of persecution. 4 words that transformed the deepest possible enmity into the deepest possible mercy. 4 words that echo through history not because they were complicated, not because they required some elaborate theological justification, but because they were said at the exact moment when the opposite reaction would have been not only understandable, but expected by literally everyone present, including the very people receiving those words. I want you to think about the practical reality of what this meant. This was not an abstract philosophical statement. This meant that the men who had exiled him were free. This meant that the men who had fought him at Badr, at Uhud, at the Battle of the Trench were free. This meant that the families who had enforced the boycott that starved his own family were free. This meant that Hind, who had mutilated the body of his beloved uncle Hamza in a display so savage it is still difficult to describe in detail, was among those granted safety and eventually accepted into the fold of Islam herself, along with her husband Abu Sufyan. Can you imagine? Can you truly place yourself in that moment and imagine what internal battle must have been required to look at the very people responsible for the murder and mutilation of your own family member and choose forgiveness over vengeance? This, my brothers and sisters, is why I say that the conquest of Makkah was not truly a military victory at its core. Though militarily it certainly was decisive. It was a victory of character. It was proof, delivered on the grandest possible stage, in front of thousands of witnesses, that the message His Holiness carried was not about power for the sake of power, was not about revenge dressed up in religious language, was not about settling scores once the balance of strength finally shifted. It was about something higher. Something that could only be explained by a heart connected to a mercy greater than his own personal feelings. A heart that had internalized the words of the Quran, describing him as a mercy to all the worlds, and lived that description out even at the one moment when living it out cost him the most. Now let's bring this closer to our own lives, because I don't want this story to remain locked in the past, admired from a distance but never applied. Every single one of us, at some point in our lives, will find ourselves in a smaller version of that same moment. Someone will wrong you, a family member, a business partner, a friend, a spouse, a sibling, and then, months or years later, circumstances will shift, and suddenly you will find yourself with some form of power over them. Maybe it's the power of information. You know something about them that could damage their reputation the way they once damaged yours. Maybe it's the power of position. You are now in a place of authority over someone who once used their authority to hurt you. Maybe it's simply the power of time and vindication. You were right, they were wrong, and now everyone can see it, and you have the opportunity to rub that fact in their face for as long as you like. What will you do in that moment? This is the real question this entire story is asking each and every one of us tonight. Because it is easy to admire the mercy shown at the conquest of Makkah from a safe historical distance, nodding along, saying, Subhanallah, what beautiful character. But the real test is not admiring it in a book or a lecture hall. The real test is living it out in your own living room, in your own workplace, in your own family gathering. When you finally have the power to make someone pay for what they did to you, and instead, you choose the words, in whatever form fits your situation. Go, you are free. I release this. I am letting this go. I am choosing mercy over my right to vengeance. I think about how many family disputes in our own communities today could be resolved if even a fraction of this restraint were applied. How many siblings are not speaking because of an inheritance dispute from years ago? Each one waiting for the moment they can finally win against the other. Finally prove they were right. finally make the other one feel the pain they once felt. How many marriages have been slowly poisoned because one spouse, having been wronged at some point, keeps a mental ledger, waiting for the perfect opportunity to bring up the old wound and use it as ammunition in a completely unrelated argument? How many friendships have quietly died, not in one dramatic explosion, but in a slow accumulation of unforgiven moments, each one adding another brick to a wall that eventually became too tall to see over? The conquest of Makkah teaches us that real strength is not measured by how hard you can strike when you finally get the chance. Real strength is measured by how gently you can choose to set that chance aside. Anyone can raise a fist when given the opportunity to retaliate. It takes something far rarer, far higher, far closer to the character Allah wants to cultivate in us, to lower that fist and open your hand instead. I also want you to notice something about the timing of all of this, because I think it carries a lesson in itself. This mercy was not shown at a moment of weakness. It was not shown because the Prophet ﷺ had no other choice, because he lacked the strength to do otherwise, because circumstances forced his hand. It was shown at the absolute peak of his strength, at the height of his power, when he had every conceivable justification and every practical capability to respond with force. This detail matters immensely, because it tells us that the mercy he displayed was not a mercy born of necessity. It was a mercy born of choice. And choices made from a position of strength reveal something far deeper about a person's true character than choices made from a position of weakness. It is easy to be humble when you have nothing. It is a far greater test to be humble when you have everything. This is why, my brothers and sisters, I want each of us to walk out of here tonight and start paying closer attention to the moments in our own lives when we hold even a small measure of power over someone who once wronged us. These moments will come. They come to all of us, in ways big and small throughout our lives. And in each of those moments we have a choice to make. We can use that power to finally balance the scales, to finally make them feel what we once felt, to finally get the satisfaction of victory that our wounded heart has been quietly craving. Or we can remember Makkah. We can remember 10,000 men standing at the gates of a city that had tried everything in its power to destroy them. And remember that the man leading them chose, at the very height of his strength, to say 4 words that changed the course of history. Go, for you are free. And I want to leave you with one final reflection before we move forward in tonight's reminder. Notice that mercy did not weaken his position. It did not make him appear soft or foolish or naive. It did the exact opposite. It made an entire city, an entire tribe, an entire people who had spent over a decade as his fiercest enemies, look upon him with such awe, such admiration, such overwhelming respect, that within a very short time they would enter into this deen in numbers greater than had ever entered it before, not by the sword, but by the sheer weight of witnessing a mercy they had never imagined possible from a victor holding all the power in his hands. This, my brothers and sisters, is the lesson we carry forward from this moment in our history, that restraint at the height of power is not weakness. It is the very definition of strength, and it has the power to win far more than any sword ever could. May Allah grant us hearts capable of mercy, even when we hold the power to do otherwise, and may He make us among those who forgive as He loves to forgive.